is, as the mayor said, probably the worst it's been. And so there's a lot more that we know than we didn't know back in March when we first kind of locked down as a city. But there's still a lot that we don't know. And so we are kind of in partnership with our medical advisory team, which is a team of doctors and nurses, medical professionals within our church community who are members, who love this church, who are committed to helping us figure this out, as well as our pastors and our staff are talking about this, and we're talking to other churches around the city because, as you know, churches are all over the map in how they're handling everything from masking to Sunday gatherings. And so we are trying to walk as much as we can with wisdom, but it is very difficult. There are a lot of competing things that we have to kind of keep in mind as we think about opening or closing down in-person gatherings. What I want you guys to know is obviously the mayor this week restricted social gatherings to 50 people or less. Religious organizations, churches were given somewhat of an exemption, both by the governor and by our mayor, who said that churches need to be at 75% capacity or less. So we have, for the last several months, moved into the fairgrounds, been operating at about 30% capacity, so well underneath that 75% requirement. But we know that some of this has to do with the First Amendment, some of this has to do with health. There's all kinds of things that play into why the mayor and the governor are giving churches so much leeway. When I was talking to a friend this week in New York City, they don't have that leeway in New York City, or San Francisco doesn't have that leeway. So we're in this weird space of having leeway and yet wanting to love our neighbor well and wanting to acknowledge that there is a risk anytime we gather together of spreading the virus. And that's true here. And what we know now that we didn't actually know back in March was that the primary way that the virus is spreading right now, according to our governor and according to our mayor, is not in gatherings like this. It's actually around your dinner tables. It's in your backyards. It's informal social hangouts and parties where people are close proximity to one another, oftentimes without masks or even with masks. That transmission is happening. And so, again, I'm not a medical professional, so I'm not qualified to speak to that. But I know that we share the burden both of wanting to love our neighbor well, wanting to love the hospitals well as hospitalizations continue to increase. We know we have a responsibility civically to pay attention to that, and so we are asking our doctors to speak into that in terms of where we're at as a city. And then we also know, though, that we have a responsibility to show up for each other in person. Church cannot be done in a disembodied way, right? That's not the ultimate true essence of the church is virtual connection. It's embodied connection. It's showing up for one another physically. And there is a risk, just as much as there is a risk of spreading the virus, there is a risk of being isolated and not having the opportunity to worship together in person. And so we want to hold those together and pay attention to both of those things and let you know we are doing our best to both comply with the guidelines, and we are, and going well under those. But I know some of you specifically asked, if social gatherings are 50 or less, why are we gathering together? This is a social gathering. And what the mayor has said before, it's important to keep in mind that when he says social gatherings, and the governor says social gatherings, what they mean are spontaneous get-togethers, where it's unplanned or people are kind of hanging out in backyards. They're not talking necessarily about, they have another category for events and larger get-togethers like this. Social gatherings tend to be places where people are milling together, talking, hanging out, having food together. It's what happens after the gatherings often that can be most risky, not necessarily only what's happening in the room. And so that's why we continue to gather for now. This week, we are continuing to gather. But we will also continue to evaluate as we head towards the holidays. We know all of the averages, all the information we have is 7 to 14 days old right now. So what the mayor said yesterday was already out of date as soon as he said it. And so if that continues to escalate, we know schools are shutting down. We have some benchmarks that we're working on as a team, in addition to positivity rates that we're looking at to evaluate whether or not it's as low. Again, there's no possibility of eliminating all risk. It's not possible. Okay? Just like when you go to the store, there's no ability to be completely safe, but to be as low risk as possible, to love our neighbors well, and to love each other well. That is really our concern, and that's how we'll continue to evaluate. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for being here. Thank you those who are joining us online. You have to search your own conscience and ask God what to do in the days to come. But I wanted to kind of give you a window into our conversations, just so you can know that we are not being ideological with this. We are not being political with this. We are not being partisan with this. We are trying to simply do what is best for both our church as a community, as well as our neighbors and our larger city responsibility. So with that being said, if you're not confused now,